Hello my friends, welcome back to the walkthrough crew. Cycle 378, this is video number 12. Let's look at our dupes like we always do. I'm at 14. I'm only going to take on one more this game, by the way. This is about where I like to sit, so I can finish it out, not have too big of an expense on oxygen and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what's going on. I have plenty of food, as you can see. I did get this stabilized. There is a pipe here that will cool stuff, but I'm not really running liquid in here anymore because it is cool enough, so we're fine on that. Barbecue is coming up like I talked about, so dupes will run any excess critters into this room and they will be drowned at night, which is a very happy thought that we can all get behind. Turn into meat and then we'll eat it over here. Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of other small things before we get to some of our major systems. That is, the major system that I'm going to eventually talk about is this, which is going to erupt here pretty soon, as you can see. And this is going to be a little scary, so I'm going to have to talk through a lot about this. But one thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that if you have a volcano that you've captured, you do need to make sure that the steam inside here doesn't exceed 150 kilograms per tile, otherwise this cannot erupt. This is something that's really easy to forget, and also if you're trying to dissipate a lot of the heat, you might just be like, oh, I'm just going to dump it into a huge pool of water. But if you do that, you're going to start risking this being totally blocked and defeating the whole purpose in the first place. So you will want to watch out for that. Let's talk about the dupe quarters here really fast. This is what my dupe quarters kind of look like when they're all finished out. I do have 2 bathrooms. I have a full panel of showers here. All of my dupes have individual rooms with these comfy beds. Lots of decor, so the decor overlay here looks great. And I use window tiles here to make sure that the decor kind of bleeds into the rooms that don't have decor in them. So like the shower, for example, still is at pretty high or max decor, even though there's nothing actually in here for it. So use diamond for these window tiles in here. That's obviously just to help my dupes' morale. And once I get the barbecue up and running and can finally uproot all these plants, then my dupes are going to be kind of at the max morale they're going to get for this game. So yeah, let's talk about this magma volcano since it's going to erupt here, and I hope we get it as part of this video. But there's a lot to talk about here. One of which, let's just take a look at how serious these volcanoes can get. We talked about the temperature that it comes out at, which is obviously ridiculously high, the magma that gets created, and the eruption period. If you multiply this out within a span of 78 seconds, we're going to take on almost 10 tons of magma, which by comparison, there's not even 10 tons of water in here. So I really need a way to dissipate all this heat and keep my machinery in here from breaking, because I don't want to have to crack this open once this is done. So this is one of those, like, you got to get it right the first time, otherwise opening it back up and trying to fix it is kind of helpless. You're probably just going to have to give up and not use the volcano after that, or really spend a lot of energy and a lot of time trying to crack this back open and fix it. So this is pretty serious. So one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to use temp shift plates, both to try to dissipate the heat as much as possible and spread it out evenly, but also to absorb some of the heat. So when I'm making these temp shift plates, if you take a look at these down in utilities, you'll see there's all kinds of different materials you can make this out of. And the materials that we make the temp shift plates out of and the room out of, like the blocks, are going to be really important. So we know that this comes out at 3,000 degrees. The ceramic has a melting point of just higher than that, so fortunately the floor will not melt and it won't pour magma everywhere. If you were to make this out of something like granite or something else, you risk this opening up, pouring magma into your base. It can get really bad. So that's why I've been harping on getting this ceramic up and running throughout the game, because it's useful in situations like this. But secondly, these temp shift plates are, the materials here are very important to be paying attention to. You definitely don't want these to melt if you can help it. You can see that this melting point is a little bit lower than what the magma will come out at. So I may lose a couple of these tiles, but mostly I want these tiles to be able to absorb a lot of heat. And that's what this specific heat capacity is for. These tiles are also incredibly expensive. You can see that they take 800 per tile. So I need to use a resource that's pretty common. And I want it to also be able to conduct heat reasonably. I think this is all fairly set for most materials with these temp shift plates. So the whole idea here is just to try to eat up as much of this heat as possible. And once we get past our first like 2-3 eruptions, it's going to really stabilize because we're going to have a lot more material sitting on the ground to take up some of that heat as well. So this can get pretty messy if you don't have a great setup for this. And I want you guys to at least see the first eruption so we can see a functional setup in this. So this is going to erupt in 0.3 cycles. I do want to show you guys one more thing that I used That's a line of these temp shift plates that are all made out of different materials. I'm just going to pause here real quick. This is kind of important. This is a good way for you to actually see all of the viable materials you could build out of and see what their stats are. So, for example, diamond is the best thing I could have possibly built out of. Has a melting point of 7,000 degrees. It will never melt. It can spread the temperature really fast. The heat capacity is a little bit worse than what I chose, but I kind of want to find a happy medium between all these three things. The problem with this, though, is that diamond's pretty rare, so I don't necessarily want to use that for that. Same with copper ore and copper. That's just way too rare. Sandstone is possible, but it melts really easily, so I don't want to use something like that if I can help it. Coal is awful. Dirt is awful. They both melt at way too low temperatures. Igneous rock is what I wound up using because it has a reasonable medium between all these things. It's pretty common. It's something I can use. There's some other things in here like granite that I didn't use. Sedimentary rock just melts too easily. It doesn't absorb a lot of heat either. So if you want to experiment with different pipes or different buildings and you want to see the stats on them, I usually just build a big line of them so I can see them all right next to each other and see which one I would want to pick based upon the best stats that I'm getting. If I had unlimited ceramic or something like that, I would probably use that. That's probably one of the better ones. The thermal conductivity isn't great though, but even still I want it to eat up as much temperature as I possibly can so that I don't start melting stuff around me. There's other stuff that would have worked great, like wolframite, for example, but the heat capacity is awful, and this is a pretty rare resource, so... Yeah, I just wanted to kind of show you guys that being a utility that you could use... Whoops. Background buildings. That you could use to determine what you want to build stuff out of. So, let's keep going. Let's watch this eruption here. Of course, like usual, I do have a lot of steam turbines just to eat up the heat. That's going to be the main thing that I'm going to use to deal with the heat that's generated from this. And also, of course, to generate the energy that I need from it. And I did flood this room with with hydrogen, like I usually do, to allow the best exchange between the pipes in the background and the actual heat producers themselves. So, 0.2 cycles, we're going to watch this mess unfold. And again, you do want to make sure you don't overpressurize this with steam, so the amount of water I have sitting in here is about 310 per tile. Once it turns into steam, it'll even out to a little bit over 100 per tile. And I can try to dial this in a little bit more if I want to pour more water in here, but... yeah, this can get really messy really quickly if you're not using the right setup for it. So we're getting pretty close here, and I'm trying to build up as much tension as possible. But yeah, we'll see it here in just a second. Okay, so once the eruption happens, magma is going to start pouring out. The first little bits will probably solidify immediately. You can already see that we're generating a lot of steam. We're generating a lot of heat. This is all things that are going to happen pretty fast. And like I said, the first couple of eruptions are going to be the worst ones in terms of making sure you can handle it. But as this erupts, this pile of igneous rock sits down here, and as this pile grows and as it spreads, this is going to be able to eat up more heat. So this will just gently give off the heat over a little bit of time. You can see it's sitting at about 2,000 degrees right now. The melting point is just barely higher than that, so at least for this first eruption, it looks like we were able to have everything solidified and not having liquid magma in here. You can see that we've already started up our steam turbines. The fourth one hasn't gotten quite enough hot steam yet. But yeah, this is going to be a pile that's going to be sitting here at about 2,000 degrees, and it's going to take a long time before this dissipates. So we have about 9,893 seconds before it dissipates. But this is the first couple of eruptions are the worst part. But we're at least in good shape for right now. I don't think we've lost any temp shift plates, so that's good. Even if we had made it out of sedimentary rock or something like that, it's debatable as to whether this stuff would have melted. But you do want to give a lot of care and a lot of thought into how you build these things out, because this can get out of control really fast. But I just wanted to show you guys that. But I am getting some free energy here, so that's great. So cool, we're good. And I'm not going to try to ship this out, by the way. I don't want to use this igneous rock. I want to have this hot igneous rock sitting in here for as long as I can. And it looks like our steam is sitting at about 90-ish kilograms per tile, maybe a little bit more on the sides. Could probably introduce a little bit more water, but, you know, we're good to go. By the way, I'm going to turn off this water coming in for this, this hydrogen setup, which I'm going to be showing in the next video. But yeah, let's talk about a couple of other things we had planned for this video now that this first eruption went well. We're getting a little bit of power off of it. Let's talk about the gold volcano, which I talked about a little bit earlier. This is a more simple volcano. But I did talk about getting the gold out of this so we can actually use it. And I did make a setup to actually chill that gold up here. So what you can do is you can hook up a signal switch And once you're ready to pull some of this out, you don't necessarily need to wait for it to cool if you don't want to. I usually just turn it on, let this fill up the box, and then once the box is full, I'll just turn it back off. What this is going to do is it's going to route gold in small chunks up through this very cold water. So this water's sitting at about 38 degrees, just barely above freezing. And this gold's going to come in here at about 500 degrees, and about midway through you can see that it's already dropped. Look at this suspense. Midway through you can already see that it's dropped down to about 40 degrees. So this is a great way to chill gold that comes out of this volcano, or iron, or whatever else you want to use. And just run it through a small little pool of water here. I'm filling it up with ice because I have tons of ice in this biome already. So then I have just the gold getting routed to my central sorting facility with the shipping like I talked about before. So it's at like a central place and I can use it on whatever I want. So I did want to mention some stuff about that. And this is definitely a setup that you can easily mimic, especially if you get one of these volcanoes inside one of these ice biomes. There's not a long travel distance between getting ice to those boxes and not. So that's good. Let's take a look at the dreco chamber, which is another thing I was going to talk about. Be forewarned, I know what a lot of people are going to see in this, and they're going to be like, this is not a setup to start harvesting reed fibers off of these drecos. And that's true. These drecos need to be immersed in hydrogen if they're going to create reed fibers. That's not the aim of this. I don't necessarily want reed fibers out of this. I have plenty from the random plants that have been growing around the map, so I'm not too worried about that. What I really want out of this is I want eggs and I want meat, and that's exactly what this is going to provide me. And the reason that I want to use drecos over, say, hatches, for example, is because there's no maintenance in this area other than making sure that I tame the drecos on this station. Other than that, the balm lilies grow for free. I don't need to bring them supplies, and that's exactly what they eat. Whereas here, I would have to run supplies here constantly, and I may even go down to one of these chambers because I have a ton of coal, by the way. So that's the whole idea with this dreco chamber. Again, it is hooked up to the shipping network, so when anything gets created, I just ship it out to the central area. If it's an egg, it goes here. If it's meat, it goes here. Anything else will just sit there. If I were using something like Weezeworts and I wanted to phosphorite out of it, I could ship it somewhere else, but this is a pretty straightforward setup. I'm probably also going to add a setup for puffs, probably right here. This is going to be mostly for rocket fuel, but also to increase the eggs that I need, because this is the time when I really want to start putting the pedal to the metal and getting as much steel up as I can. For right now, I have about 6 tons of steel. It's not a bad start, but when we're getting out in space, I really want to go with maybe like 10 or 20, just to make sure I can get everything up that I need to get up in order to really survive and kind of thrive out there right away. So steel is a big production pain point, and you can see that I need iron as well, so I'm refining this iron. If I had an iron volcano, that would be great. That would solve a lot of my problems, but I don't, so I need to figure out a different way to do it. Also, this might be an iron volcano, so I should probably go unearth this at some point. One last thing that I want to talk about with this is I want to talk about performance. By this stage of the game, and especially if you have this much of the map revealed, and if you're starting to get up around 10, 12 dupes, you might start noticing pretty bad performance in the sense that your dupes may take a long time to make decisions, or your frame rate might be suffering, or something like that. So I'd recommend to start putting a bunch of these storage bins around, and this is just to have your dupes eventually clean up the map. I usually load these storage bins with everything that I'm not planning on shipping to different places, so like I don't want to have them bring critter eggs here or like ice here or something like that. So this is a pretty selective set of things, and if you eventually want to ship this into your network, you can put up like, you know, things like this, put up some auto sweepers, put up a couple bins here and there, so we wait for that long hitch. And you could eventually ship this all back to your central area to introduce it into your shipping network. But by this point, you should be pretty self-sustainable on all the things that you want to ship anyway, so I don't see a ton of use for that. And this is really just for performance reasons. The reason that this is better for performance, if you wanted a more in-depth explanation, is because when you put stuff in a box, this kind of focuses it all to one small space, and it starts to combine things into smaller or bigger piles. Whereas if you have these things sitting around the map, like, say, here, each one of these piles could be really tiny piles, and they will all have the same expense as that big box does. So the reason that these things are expensive is because it's constantly exchanging its heat with stuff around it. And if you have, say, like 10,000 piles of things exchanging their heat, that's a lot worse than having, say, a few hundred boxes exchanging their heat. So that's definitely why you want to worry about performance by this stage of the game. And that's an easy way to do it. Just have your dupes set to maybe even a lower priority than that, maybe even like 4. So if they start to idle or anything like that, they just go help your computer's performance in the meantime. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have. Like I teased out a little bit, I'm going to be getting on this hydrogen vent. It won't erupt for another 16 cycles or so this may be a quick turnaround before the next video. But I'm going to be explaining this whole setup as it looks a little complicated, just to kind of get the basic idea of what this is going to be doing. I'm also going to potentially be on this leaky oil fissure, and I've been watching this for a long time, and this leaky oil fissure goes dormant, and when it does, it's for like a few cycles, which is not enough time for me to actually build around it before it starts erupting hot oil into this ice biome. So I don't want to mess with this until I have a whole setup constructed around it, and I will get that setup up hopefully at the same time that I can explain this hydrogen setup. And the way I'm going to do this is probably just build everything around it and unearth it the very last. So like these tiles, I'm not going to dig out until everything is totally set up around it. So that's a strategy you can use as well. I may also unearth this volcano just to see what it is. But by this point, all we really need before we're waiting to get out into space is enough steel and plastic to do so. We do have a good amount of plastic, so I've stopped my production so far, but the steel is something we still need a little bit more of. So I'm just going to find ways to increase my energy in the meantime so that once we go out to space, once we're using those really expensive and heavy on power transport tubes, that we're not having any power issues. So yeah, we're looking pretty good. I'll be back here pretty soon to explain some more stuff. But yeah, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Please post any things you have down in the comments, and I will see you later.